Welcome to the Proxy Sizing in SEER webinar. The objective of this webinar is to give you a quick introduction to proxy sizing in SEER and also demonstrate how you can create a proxy using the size metric generator in SEER. Okay, so I'm going to start sharing my desktop. We're going to be switching back and forth between the slides and the size metric generator and also the SEER SAM tool. Okay. So effort-driven estimation via SEER for software proxies. So first of all, what is a proxy in SEER? Okay. So a proxy is basically an approach that SEER provides to you to do effort-driven estimation. So what if you know how long it takes to build a certain program item, but you have no clue about how many function points or how many lines of code it is? You just happen to know that, for example, I've been doing screen reports for years, and I know what a screen report should take in terms of effort. Okay, so how do you size it? How do we size if we don't know the lines of code or the function points associated with that screen report? Well, the answer is proxy sizing. Okay, so you can use proxy sizing in SEER. They allow you to estimate or to size your project using vernacular or vocabulary that you and your estimators and your developers are familiar with. Okay, the proxies are going to be aligned to specific platform and application type, and you can use the proxies to create different project variations, different scenarios, and different combinations using the same proxy. You can basically do any combination of proxy elements to size your project. And they're very easy to deploy in SEER for software. And actually, the objective of this webinar is to show you how easy that is. We're going to be demonstrating how to create a proxy. And we're going to be also testing and validating that proxy. So in a few words, proxy sizing is basically backfiring size. Okay. So we need to start by specifying or defining what the typical effort is required to complete one of something. Could be a screen report, could be an interface, could be an input form. It could be a Java class, for example, a web page. Okay, so any software artifact that you are constantly developing, and you know how much effort it takes to develop. Okay, so that's one of the inputs that we're going to need, the typical effort to complete one of something. And we're also going to need the specific project characteristics. And to be more specific, these are the knowledge bases and the programming language that you use to develop this functionality. Okay, so these two inputs are going to be provided to the SEER for software proxy builder tool. We also call this our size metric generator. And just for you to have an idea, our size metrics generator is an Excel worksheet that automates the creation of a proxy. This tool can be provided to you upon request. Okay, and it's very, very easy to use. It basically automates all the process. So you provide those two inputs to the proxy builder generator, and basically what the tool is going to do is it's going to calculate the amount of lines of code or function points that are associated with the functionality you are describing. Now, if all you're interested on is on doing effort-driven estimation, then you don't need to be familiar with, you don't need to understand, or not even look at the number of lines of code or function points. You're only going to specify the typical effort that is required to do something, and you should be able to get an estimate by sizing your project using those elements without having to look at the number of lines of code or function points. Okay, so this is what we call effort-driven estimation. Okay, it's estimated based on the effort that it takes to do something. But in reality, what's happened behind the scenes is that SEER is calculating an associated number of function points or lines of code for each proxy element, and is using those lines of code or those function points to generate the estimate. All right, so that was a very quick introduction to proxies in SEER. Not now, please. Now we're going to demonstrate how to create a proxy using the size metric generator. So the process is very simple. We basically have to follow 3 very simple and concise steps. The first step is to specify the knowledge base for the project. So these are the knowledge bases that describe the typical environment under which you develop the functionality. So as you know, SEER uses 5 knowledge bases: platform, the application type, acquisition method, the development method, and the development standards. Okay. Something very important to specify and to mention here is that the proxy we create, it's gonna work and it's going to produce the expected result as long as we use it under the specific set of knowledge bases that the proxy was created for. Okay. If you need to develop the same functionality across different platforms or different applications, then you're going to have to create a separate proxy for each project environment, for each different platform or each different application type. You're going to need a different proxy for each environment. Okay, so step 1, again, specify the knowledge bases. Step 2, specify some additional assumptions. Okay, this over here. And those additional assumptions are basically the programming language, the minimum time versus optimal effort constraint. As you know, SEER allows you to specify if you want to optimize your estimate for minimum time or optimal effort. So that's another thing you have to specify. And finally, you're going to have to specify whether you want to create a proxy in lines of code or function points. And remember, as I mentioned earlier, if all you're interested on is doing effort-driven estimation, then you don't need to be familiar with lines of code or function points for your proxy. You just specify the expected effort that it takes to do each functionality. However, if you're also interested on benchmarking your estimate results against industry data or against historical data from the organization, then you are going to have to create a proxy in units that are consistent with the other projects in the organization. Okay, so if you're interested in benchmarking using function points, you create your proxy in function points. Otherwise, you can create it in lines of code. And finally, we're going to define the typical effort that it takes to complete each proxy element, each proxy item, and also the overall project effort. So let's see how these steps apply to a practical example. All right, so let's create a proxy. We're going to be creating a proxy here for estimating input forms and reports. So the first step here is to specify the knowledge bases. So we go into our size metric generator and we specify knowledge bases: business mission critical, graphical user interface. The acquisition method is going to be new development, okay, agile, full, and commercial standards. Agile, full, and commercial standards. Okay. Java is going to be the programming language, and we're going to specify a minimum time constraint. I'm going to select Java for the programming language and minimum time constraint, and we're going to create the proxy in function points. Okay, non-adjusted function points. The next step is to specify the typical effort to complete each proxy item and the overall project effort. So let's say we've been doing input forms and reports for a while, and we classify those input forms and reports based on their complexity, and we certainly know that these are the amount of hours that it takes to do each of those input forms and reports. So let's go ahead and enter that information here. So we're going to have simple input form, average input form, and complex input form. We're going to have simple report, average report, and complex report. And we know the effort associated with a simple input form is 80 hours. Average input form is going to be 140 hours. We enter that here. Complex input form is going to be 250 hours. And I know this. How do I know this? Well, I've been doing these input forms and reports for a while, and based on my experience, I know this is what it takes. I don't have a clue of how many function points are behind a simple input form. All I know is that it takes 80 hours to develop one of those. 60 hours for the simple report, 120 hours for the average report, and 200 hours for the complex report. And the overall project effort is going to be around the 2,500 hours. That means that a typical project that I develop, using input forms and reports, the typical project size is something around the 2,500 hours. Okay, so that's an important value to specify in SEER, because SEER has some entropy metrics embedded in the calculation, so the results might be different depending on the expected overall project effort. So if you're always doing very small projects, then you should specify that. If you're always doing very big projects and you want your proxy to be very accurate for very large projects, then you specify your overall project effort. So that's basically the idea behind this value here. But we know it's going to be around 2,500 hours, the typical size or the typical effort for a full project. We're going to specify a name for our proxy. Let's call it input forms and reports. All right. Then the next step, once we have entered all the information, as you can see, the next step is to generate the size metric. So we're going to press on this button, and what's going to happen is when I press on this button, the size metric generator tool, which is this worksheet, it's going to invoke SEER for software to perform all the calculations involved in the proxy. So we press on this button, and as you can see an instance of SEER. It's open right now. All the calculations are taking place automatically right now, and that's it. So as you can see, the tool came up with these values right here for each of the proxy elements. Okay, so what are these values? You don't need to be familiar, you don't need to understand these values. But for your own information, these values are the size factor that SEER calculated for each of your proxy elements. In other words, you specify that a simple input form should take 80 hours to develop under these specific project characteristics. Okay, so what SEER does is it backfires an equivalent size in function points. So basically, SEER is telling us that to do a simple input form, it takes 80 hours, and that effort is approximately equivalent to developing 5.4 function points under this type of environment. In a similar way, for example, a complex input form that you know takes 250 hours, SEER has calculated that 250 hours is approximately the same effort associated with developing 16.8 function points, okay? So in other words, this is the mapping factor. This is how many function points each of your proxy elements is equivalent to in terms of effort, okay? Well, remember, if you're only interested in doing effort-driven estimation, you don't need to look at these numbers, and those are just the logic behind the scenes, all right? So now that we highlighted the size factors, the next step is to save the proxy into the K-basis folder in SEER. Before you save the proxy by pressing on this button, you have to make sure that this path is correct. This path should be pointing to your K-basis folder in SEER. Under the standard install, your K-basis folder is going to be located under My Documents, SEER, SEER-SUM 8.1, or whatever your latest version is, K-basis. So that's where we want to point. We want to point to the K-basis folder, press OK. And now I just need to save this as a new size metric. So a .prx file, which is the file associated with the proxy, has been saved into the K-basis folder. That means that our new proxy should be available in SEER now, and we can start sizing projects using that proxy. Okay. So the next step is let's use the proxy. Let's use the proxy and estimate a project and see if the results that we get from the proxy are the same expected results that we can calculate from our expected effort. Okay, so we're going to be creating a project that has 5 complex reports, 6 average reports, 5 simple input forms, and 2 complex input forms. Based on the hours that it takes for each individual item, these are the total hours that this project is expected to take for each individual proxy element. And all in all, we're expecting our project to take around 1,620 hours. So let's model that project in SEER using our proxy and see if we can get the correct result. So we're going to be creating a new project. Let's call these testing proxy input forms and reports. You can type your name here if you want to. Okay. The knowledge bases, remember, we need to use our proxy under the same set of knowledge bases that it was designed to be used. So this is where data mission critical, graphical user interface, new development, agile full, and commercial. So we create a new project. Let's add a new program now. Okay. You can use your proxy with different K-bases than those that were used to create the proxy. So if you do that, just be aware that the results are not going to match 100%. There may be differences, slight differences, or big differences, depending on how different the knowledge bases are. But if you want the proxy to deliver the specific results that you specified, your proxy needs to be used on the same set of knowledge bases that it was designed to be used. Okay, and remember what I said earlier, if you're going to be estimating projects under different platforms and different application types and different methods and standards, then you're going to have to create several proxies for each of those project environments. Okay. Remember, we said that the programming language was going to be Java for this type of functionality, Java. And now we're going to come here to the proxy sizing section here, and let's load our new proxy, input forms and reports. Right here. Okay. As you can see, when I load the proxy, I get a list of my proxy elements, and now I don't need to worry about how many function points or how many lines of code. I just size my project using these categories here. These categories that I'm familiar with and I understand and I can easily count. So for this specific project, we're going to have 5 complex reports. Uncertainty, we're not going to specify any uncertainty. It's going to be 5 all across 6 average reports. 6 average reports. 5 simple input forms. 5 simple input forms. Finally, 2 complex input forms. And as you can see, SEER has estimated a total effort of 2,625 hours, which is very, very close to the 2,620 hours that we were expecting. Okay. So as you can see, just as a recap, we introduced the concept of proxy sizing in SEER. We walked you through the process of creating a proxy in SEER using the size metric generator tool. We created a proxy and we tested and validated that the proxy delivers the expected results very accurately. As you can see, 2,620 hours was our expected effort, and SEER, using the proxy, came up with an estimate of 2,625 hours. Okay, so that's going to be the end of this session. Please do not hesitate to contact us if you have any questions related to proxies or any other estimation topic. We'll be glad to help you. Thank you.